Hey, good afternoon to you. 506 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up today, Mike Benz joins us from the Foundation for Freedom Online. He's a former State Department diplomat as well. We'll talk to him about the weaponized deep state, the national security state, and how they set their sights on manipulating operations right here in the United States of America. Manipulating conversations, censoring, using the big tech companies to do it. Mike has all the details. You definitely don't want to miss this conversation ahead at 5:30 with Mike Benz. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. By the way, on the issue of the Supreme Court, we were just talking to Azra Nomani a couple minutes ago about how the court today declined to take up the racist admissions policy at TJ High School that was just imposed by the left a few short years ago in Alexandria, Virginia. And, the court is constantly being attacked by the left, assailed, even when they do things like this. They're like, we'll let the left keep being racist when it comes to admitting students. But anytime the court even comes close to taking away the left's tyranny, they freak out and they say that the court's illegitimate. And they have special ire for Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. They really, really hate him. Really hate him. In fact, this week, there was a big segment I was playing for you yesterday that John Oliver did on his HBO show, not only attacking Clarence Thomas, but attempting to bribe him on the air, saying that they were going to give him, they were making an offer to him. This is what they said on the show, that they would give him a multi-million-dollar RV so he could travel the country. They've seen some reporting that that's one of his favorite ways of traveling around the country. So they're going to give him a multi-million-dollar RV and $1 million a year, and all he has to do is sign a contract and within 30 days, and these presents will be delivered to him. That's what John Oliver said on his show this weekend, and I, of course, pointed out yesterday, I'm pretty sure that's a crime, what they just did, which is to try and bribe a federal official to achieve an outcome that they'd prefer, which is him not being on the United States Supreme Court. I could be wrong, but if it was inversed, if all of the elements were inversed, and you had, say, Jesse Waters at Fox News offering Elena Kagan millions of dollars to leave the United States Supreme Court and doing it in a nationally televised setting where there's plenty of documentary evidence that he did it with some actual honest intent built into it, including, I've got a contract. If you sign it within 30 days, you get these goodies. I don't know. The elements, to me, just not being a lawyer, it just seems like the left would take advantage of that and make Jesse Waters' life a living hell. To me, that's what I would think. But I was reminded today, I see some friends on social media, including Tom Fitton over at Judicial Watch, sharing this video of a clip of Justice Clarence Thomas some time ago. This is in my memory. I know this happened a while ago. Sitting down and having, one of these, kind of rare taped conversations, interviews that these Supreme Court justices will do from time to time. And he was talking about, Justice Thomas was talking about how the media wants him to quit, wants him not to be on the United States Supreme Court. And he's got some thoughts about this, and I thought maybe you should hear them just to remind you of Justice Thomas's position on the media.
One of the things I say in response to the media is when they talk about, or especially early on, about the way I did my job, I said, I will absolutely leave the court when I do my job as poorly as you do yours. And that was meant as a compliment, really.
I think we've neglected this side of the room.
Oh, gosh.
All the way over here, yes.
It really is good to be me. It really is.
That laugh is just the best, isn't it? He doesn't even care. He's like, yeah, whatever. You can tell me to quit. I just can't imagine his response to the John Oliver thing this weekend. I'm going to give you $1 million a year if you quit. Well, I don't know. $1 million doesn't go as far as it used to. Not in Biden's America. You might have to up the offer. But he's laughing at these people. Yeah, I'll quit as soon as I do my job as poorly as you do yours. God bless him for that and so much more. It's just amazing. Anyway, that clip bopping around on social media today. Meanwhile, in terms of actual legal battles going on, you have this massive fine imposed on Donald Trump this past week, designed to only enrich the state of New York and impoverish Donald Trump, and to punish him for being a political figure who dares challenge the power of the Democrats. That's it. This is a victimless case. There was not a single victim. The banks were not defrauded. They were completely content with Donald Trump's relationship with them. But this Arthur Engeron and Letitia James, they come in and they say, no, it's Trump. Trump's guilty of a crime here. He committed a fraud, and therefore he owes some $400 billion now, is the claim. So let's see here. I've got Kevin O'Leary over, remember, he's one of the stars of Shark Tank alongside Mark Cuban and a bunch of other people. And he's been doing the rounds on the television network saying New York is a loser state for doing this. And they're scaring away business. What person in their right mind would try to set up a business in a state like this who can arbitrarily decide to impoverish you just for practicing your business there without any victim of any crime whatsoever? So I played audio of Kevin over saying this on Fox this week. Now he's over on CNN saying the same thing, and CNN doesn't even know how to handle it. He was with, the hostess is Laura Coates, Kevin O'Leary. Here's the audio.
I'm shocked at this. I can't even understand or fathom the decision at all. There's no rationale for it. And so let me give you a real-time...
Is what I'm playing right now from Fox or from CNN? I think that audio may be from the Fox hit. Let me advance to the CNN hit last night to make sure I've got this. This is definitely CNN with Laura Coates.
Wouldn't there be many companies who would not want to do business or loan money to people like yourself or investors if they know that they can get away with fraud and there's no recourse to protect them?
Okay, so she's rationalizing Arthur Engeron's decision here. Well, isn't there something legitimate about this decision? Kevin says, no, this is stupid.
Excuse me, what fraud? This is not about Trump anymore. When you get a developer that builds a building and he says it's worth $400 million and he wants to borrow $200 million from a bank, which happens every day, everywhere on earth, including every American city, every developer is an entrepreneur. They shine the light on their building and they say it's worth $400. The bank does its own due diligence, as was done in this case, because they're very good at it. The banks are very good, and they say, no, it's worth $300. We're only going to loan you $150 million.
Yeah, what kind of moron do you have to be to run a bank and be like, oh, you have this many, this is the value of your assets? Okay, I'll just believe you. Because you said it, I'll believe you. Okay, here, I'll lend you some money now. You wouldn't have a bank. You'd be gone in a second if that was the way you assessed who you loaned money to. So, of course, the bank is assessing the value of these assets. Saying, okay, does this guy actually have a way to make good should he fail to pay us back? What could we take from him? What does he have? What is the evidence that he has the income to support this loan? All of the basics you might assess if you were a bank. So Kevin is describing on CNN a very elementary understanding of how a loan works. And apparently CNN needs the primer.
That haggling has gone on for decades. That's how it works. And then in this case, even, the bank that was supposedly defrauded testified and said, we didn't lose anything. We want to do business with this guy again. We'd like to. But the judge said, no. Let's penalize this developer for $355 million. And if we're going to do that, let's penalize all the developers all across America. They've all done the same thing. All of them should go to jail, and we should stop building buildings. That's what the message is from New York. Even the governor herself is concerned about what this looks like to investors all around the world.
Yeah, and what he's saying is like, look, if you go and you secure a loan, if you're one of these big developers, you go in and you offer the best looking valuation you can for your assets. You say, this is what I think this is worth at this huge number. I can prove it to you. That building sold for that much. That building sold for that much. You try and make your case that you're entitled to the most favorable possible terms for the loan. And the bank comes back and they say, it's not actually worth that much. In fact, a couple properties like that sold for a lot less than you're saying right here. So you'll figure out a place to meet, right? And then establish that contract, do that business. Again, basic details. Now, Laura Coates, the CNN hostess, there's something really funny about this audio because Kevin O'Leary begins to try to appeal to her expertise, appeal to her, her whatever her business is. He says, she's a lawyer. You're a lawyer. You understand this stuff, he says. And for whatever reason, she takes that as an opportunity to demonstrate how insecure she is about her own life and her job on the air. It's one of the weirdest things, but see if you can detect it here.
You really think people want to invest money in New York after this? How about we go somewhere else?
I think there are people who would. I don't want to cut you off, but I want to converse with you instead.
You just did.
It's only because I want to have a conversation,
you know what?
Kevin,
I respect
as opposed
you,
to just
I
having
respect
you tell
because
me.
you're a lawyer. You're a lawyer. You understand exactly what I'm talking about.
I got to tell you, I'm respectable for a number of reasons, Kevin O'Leary, but being a lawyer is one of those issues. But I'll tell you, when I hear your conversation.
What is that? How much latent insecurity must you have? I'm not just respectable for being a lawyer, I should have you know. I'm respectable for a lot of reasons, Kevin. You have no idea how respectable I am. What? What are you even talking about? Who cares what he just said? Just ask your question. Do you lack that much self-confidence that you have to check him on not knowing enough about you? Oh, well, I'll have you know my biography is much more interesting than you even realize, Kevin O'Leary. What? What is going on here? Have you seen your psychiatrist lately? Maybe talk it out. Here's more. Laura Coates asking Kevin O'Leary about all this.
Conversation, and I do want to converse with you about this point. I understand that there are legitimate concerns that were raised during the trial and will continue to be raised about who the quote-unquote, who is actually bringing the suit. It wasn't the banks who were saying that we as consumers or unsophisticated feel this way, but Letitia James, the Attorney General, and I know you want to expand beyond Trump, has suggested, well, it's about making the playing field level for those who are not the major and billionaire.
The woman ran on destroying this guy. It's not about making the playing field level. Justice is blind. You've got to be a world-class dummy to believe that. No wonder she's so insecure. She has imposter's guilt. She's sitting on national television preaching to the rest of us about the way we should think about all of this. And meanwhile, the very woman she's talking about, Letitia James, ran on the destruction of the very man that New York just imposed a $400 million fine upon in a situation where there are no victims. Letitia James ran on the following claim, that Donald Trump is an illegitimate president. She said that over and over and over again prior to the voters in New York deciding, yeah, sure, that psychopath should be our attorney general. She's a truther. She is a conspiracy theorist about our elections. And she said that Donald Trump was a fraud, that he was an, quote, illegitimate president. She's the con artist. And Laura Coates is like sitting there saying, oh, well, she just wanted to make sure that, you know, everyone had an equal playing field. That's what Letitia James's motivations were. Really? Have you checked the public record, like, at all?
Investors, but for those who are supposed to put business records out there, want to get a loan, the idea of making sure that they have to have the same true statements included as those who have a lot more money. Is there any weight to that for you?
Well, I asked you who lost money, and I'll make it even clearer. You and I, we're developing a data center together, and I say to you, we can go to New York, where this just happened. It's your money now. You're now an investor, and you're taking risk. You're an entrepreneur with me, right beside me. We're together on the deal. Or I can show you Oklahoma, North Dakota, West Virginia, where the governors actually ran businesses. Let's go there, where this never happened before.
Yeah, instead of what he refers to, these loser states like New York, a once great state. The Empire State has fallen. All right, let's go to the phones. I've got Willie calling in from Culpeper, now line 4. Willie, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Vince, how you doing? It's a great show as usual. Listen, real estate values go up and down.
Yeah.
The developers sometimes have to take it in the shorts when they get property that they've invested in that lost money. Property doesn't always go up, not always, but sometimes it does. And I can give you one example. There was a piece of property. Houses were cleared off. This is another state. And at the time, the church owned it and says, hey, that's the pastor's house. It's a terrible thing. Well, later on, that property sold for over $1 million. And the real estate master, who was an attorney, said, you know, things are high right now, but things can go bad.
Right.
And sure enough, they did. A few years later, they had that terrible thing, 208. This judge, how did he pass law school, for heaven's sakes?
Yeah.
He ought to be disbarred.
I know.
It's incompetent.
It's totally crazy. And also, like, the valuation of your property, it kind of depends on who you're talking to, what you really want it to be thought about, how you want it to be thought about, right? So, like, if you're selling your home, you want everyone to think it's the most expensive property ever. It's very coveted. You've got to spend a lot of money to get this house. But if you're dealing with the tax man, you want him to assess it at the lowest possible value you can. If your tax assessment comes in low, that's good news for you. That means you're going to pay a lot less in taxes each year, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so it's entirely contingent on the people you're dealing with. But either way, this is the kind of wrangling that constantly goes on, and it is not a fraud. And no bank was defrauded here. And Willie, it's just, as you point out, just a total atrocity here. This judge out of control. In fact, let me get Mark in Woodbridge in here, line 3. Mark, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince, thanks for taking my call. Great show. Love it. Listen almost every day.
Thank you, Mark.
Anyway, who gets the money that they just find Trump? I know there's a lot of ins and outs. Where does the money? Nobody's been defrauded.
Right.
Who's going to get that money? Where does it go?
Yeah, there's no bank. There's no bank that's on the receiving end of this cash. In fact, the state of New York takes it, Mark. They're imposing a fine. They're just gonna take the money away from him and enrich their own treasury, their own coffers.
But I don't understand that. How can they do that? I mean, it's, he's business.
Yes, I know. It's crazy.
Hey,
you're as stunned as I am.
Good luck on them ill-gotten gains that them criminals are going to claim this year.
Yeah, I know. You hear the Chris Plantes. Yeah, the IRS wants all the criminals to declare their stolen goods for tax purposes. Hey, you steal a car recently? Remember to declare it on your taxes, you law-abiding citizens. Meanwhile, Trump creates endless tax revenue for the state of New York, and now they want to hurt him because he doesn't share their politics. The world we live in. Hey, coming up, Mike Benz joins us just minutes away, a man who's an expert on the left's censorship regime and how it's taking over the planet. Mike tells us the truth while you're still allowed to in public. Hey, good afternoon to you. It's 5:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. You can join us today at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. We support free speech here at WMAL. Can't say the same thing about all of our institutions, though, unfortunately. Remember, Donald Trump wins in 2016 on the strength of his ability to circumvent the corporate media. But after that, well, the big tech companies, the corporate news outlets, they all clamped down on Trump and the people who supported him. And it's happening all over the planet now. Few people understand it better than my next guest. Mike Benz joins us now. He's the executive director of the Foundation for Freedom Online and a former State Department diplomat. Mike, thank you so much for taking some time today, sir.
Yeah, thanks for talking to me.
I really appreciate it. And I have to say, I have received messages from so many people over the course of the last week who saw your interview with Tucker Carlson. Tucker did a big interview with you and shared it to social media, and it's being passed around like hotcakes right now. Everybody wants to hear what Mike Benz has to say because you really do have a very detailed knowledge of the way our institutions work and the way that they've been censoring speech in kind of covert ways. Mike, how did you get into this business?
Well, I was a corporate lawyer. I worked on M&A and hedge funds and private equity for the first 7-8 years of my career. But I'd always been an avid chess player, and something really strange happened that sort of took my life sideways in late 2016. In August 2016, I came across just kind of doing my own research on the internet about some of the things I was seeing about internet censorship, and I came across basically, documents around the creation of an artificial intelligence censorship technique. It's called natural language processing, and it basically, I looked at it and I said, wow, this works really similar to the way chess engines work when they analyze a chess position, except it, this is for human words. And I lived through that period when I was a little kid of Deep Blue beating Garry Kasparov and totally, rendering humans helpless against this. So before I really was even apprised of the censorship industry and the government's role in it and all the different institutions and networks and funding sources and all of that, at the very early outset, before it was even really applied domestically, I began writing a book and a documentary about the threat that this was going to cause, because I figured if machines could do that to humans in the chess field, then we had no chance on social media. There would be no freedom of speech in the Western world again. And so I embarked on this path that I thought was essentially my calling. I left law and I joined the Trump administration, and I tried to tell everybody in D.C. about this. But at the time, no one could really appreciate it. From 2017 to, all the way up until, basically mid to late 2020, it was no one wanted to believe that this industry was being created around internet censorship. No one wanted to believe that, these new technological tools are being used in order to proactively ban speech rather, by the millions, rather than reactively doing this kind of whack-a-mole, manual moderation. And, so I've basically been doing this for 8 years straight. And,
yes.
It did just sort of come out of nowhere.
Yeah. I mean, and obviously Trump's election is not the only event where the internet proved to be a place where you could circumvent the traditional realms of communication. But it does seem like a lot has changed since 2016. Mike, how much has the information environment changed in just the last 8 years?
Oh, it's completely ended the golden age of the internet. I mean, it's night and day. Everything about it has changed. Because remember, beyond the simple act of censorship itself, there was a sense from 2006 to 2016, social media was sort of you had Facebook in 2004 and YouTube 2005, Twitter 2006, smartphone 2007. There was basically 10 years of centralized internet social media speech where, in addition to never being censored for what you said, you also had platform security, in the sense that there was a feeling that, if you could just make great content, that you could scale your little one small voice to the size of the New York Times. There was never any sort of institutional force or terms of service policy threat that would make an ordinary citizen feel like there was a ceiling on how far they could go to extend their microphone if they were speaking truth or producing popular content. But the culture has changed. But in particular, we now live under the dominion of these things I call weapons of mass deletion. Every word you say on the internet, every sentence you write, every Facebook post you do, every YouTube video, has a speech to text transliteration for the closed captioning. It all gets broken down into individual words. All of those words are then analyzed by tens of thousands of different trust and safety filters, which all basically intermediate your ability to reach other audiences. And every politically sensitive narrative has a complex topography of trust and safety layers in order to rig the field of play in favor of establishment narratives.
As you're saying all this, I'm also thinking of Apple just announced a couple weeks ago that every podcast on the internet that is served through Apple, which would include, by the way, this show, we distribute our podcasts everywhere, including on Apple products, is now going to have automatically generated transcripts. So this is not just a matter of convenience. It's also, as you point out, a matter of censorship.
Yeah, but so I initially started the story writing this book that I've been pregnant with for 8 years, the Weapons of Mass Deletion. But by 2018, they had already come home. They basically came home in late 2017 after a bunch of European laws forced U.S. tech companies to adopt them, and then so I started widening my lens to this concept of the censorship industry, and it was really through that what you just said, I think is interesting to touch on, which is that in addition to you mentioned these automatic transcripts, and so there's the way automated censorship works is it's through mapping words and relationships between words and trying to sort of suss sentiment, and it ultimately affixes every sentence or phrase with a sort of toxicity score that if it's above a certain confidence interval will trip a certain trust and safety layer, a censorship layer.
Right.
And what's really interesting about that, in particular, is in addition to the technological side of that, the censorship industry is comprised of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, if you include NATO countries, of manually employed academic researchers and NGO, salaried NGO blob monsters, if you will, whose job is to chronicle the words that we use in order to keep the censorship algorithms constantly up to date in a kind of evolutionary arms race against whatever's going viral. And so you have tens of thousands of people who are now employed by not just the platforms, but by 60 different U.S. universities in America who all get their funding from your tax dollars. The National Science Foundation has spent about $60 to $70 million spread across over 60 U.S. universities who get paid to form these so-called rapid response units in order to map everything that you're saying. If you belong to whatever the grant is for climate misinformation, abortion misinformation, immigration misinformation, election misinformation, COVID misinformation, the sky's the limit. Every single sensitive policy issue can now be rigged essentially by the hand of God by combining this kind of chess engine style technology, but instead of in a children's game, it's the stakes of democracy itself.
Yes, the idea behind this, to the extent that anyone rationalizes this type of industry or this type of activity, is that it's designed to keep us safe, right? It goes back to back decades, the idea that the government would listen for certain keywords on a phone call to intercept sort of threats going on in the United States. And we're constantly being sold on, hey, there's a meaningful threat to the United States, a threat to our peace and our liberty, and we can tackle it so long as we have this technology. And I can see why somebody might sell us that, especially to stop something like a terrorist attack. But the broad definitions here of what the threats are really kind of out of control, aren't they, Mike?
Yeah, well, I think what you're saying was true from 2017 to 2019 when the censorship industry was just getting started here in the U.S. under the predicate of Russiagate and Russian interference and Russia being a hostile foreign nation state, so you could sort of launder in a national security predicate. But they don't even do that anymore. They don't even need that. The Department of Homeland Security had an office called the Office of Misdis and Malinformation. There was nothing, it wasn't about taking out violent harm. They didn't even attempt to draw a line. It was just, they made the argument that elections are critical infrastructure. And if you deny the safety and reliability of mail-in ballots, you are undermining public faith and confidence in elections, and therefore you are committing an attack against U.S. critical infrastructure, a cyber attack against U.S. critical infrastructure by simply tweeting that you don't think mail-in ballots are a good idea. They don't even try that. I mean, we're actually past the national security predicate in so many respects.
I remember a phrase that stands out to me ever since I first heard it. I was like, boy, that's Orwellian. The idea that our critical infrastructure includes something called our cognitive infrastructure as well, that our minds are a part of the infrastructure that the government needs to manage.
Well, NATO has a whole field of study called cognitive security. So does the Pentagon. This is what I was describing in the Tucker interview and many others. If folks want to check me out on Twitter at Mike Benz Cyber, you'll see, just run a search for my handle at Mike Benz Cyber with the phrase cognitive security or NATO, and you'll see all of this. But there's an entire field of study, and it's not just study. I mean, it's DARPA, it's places like the Minerva Initiative, which is the PSYOP center of the Pentagon. It's all of these, the entire armada of CIA cutouts like the National Endowment for Democracy and the other NGOs and university centers, plus private sector censorship mercenary firms like NewsGuard and others that all form this whole of society censorship network that was deliberately set up that way. That's their term, not mine. They say it so frequently that they will apologize on their own Zoom calls for using the phrase because it's so trite and cliche to themselves from having sort of hypnotically repeated the mantra for so many years.
So why does the traditional media root all of this censorship on, in your view? Is it a product of them wanting to protect their incumbency. They don't like the threat of up-and-comers or the individual Twitter account getting the kind of attention that the New York Times thought that it was entitled to? Or is it a matter of political preference? They're trying to guard their ideology from any sort of naysayers, or is it a combination of both?
Yeah, I mean, are you kidding me? I mean, they were on the verge of death by the end of 2016. You know, I mean, that one of the reasons that they clamored so hard, you know, to the boot heel of the national security state and you know, had zero hesitation to join this whole society censorship drive, was because all of their business models were getting totally crushed by the fact that all that traffic was rushing to social media and to you know, citizen journalists. You know, and this is what I mentioned, you know, on the Tucker segment. I mean, I remember 2017, 2018, you know, watching all of these, you know, these panels with 4-star generals and heads of the CIA and NSA, and they're all talking about you know, how the rules-based international order is going to come apart if the New York Times is reduced to a medium-sized Facebook page. And you know, so there's a couple of stakeholders in that. One is, and this is the other side of what you were saying, and that I agree with, which is that the analogy that I give here is a game of thummy war. And you know, you know how you can do that little pointer finger trick in order to sort of cheat and take down your opponent's thumb with a sort of sneak attack that you can't really stop. Well, you know, there was a thummy war going on between legacy media and social media voices. And, you know, the social media thumb was killing the legacy media thumb. But the big bad pointy finger, you know, sneak attack that should be illegal, but you can't stop if someone does it to you, is the national security state. So it was perfect because all of their interests were completely aligned. It was populist parties who were rising to power, and the national security state wanted to stop that for political and economic reasons. And it was those same populist groups that were rising on social media and that were developing their own robust social third-party media ecosystem. These were places like Breitbart. Now remember, Breitbart in 2016 was estimated to be on par to catching up to Fox News. Now they got crushed in 2017 because 99% of their ad revenue, as was most of the rest of the conservative news ecosystem, was killed precisely because of this CIA, Pentagon, State Department, foreign policy establishment blob plan, which they, you know, which you know, I have all of that stuff on my website, all the receipts around how institutions like NewsGuard and Project Owl and the authoritative news re-ranking and the plot to kill $2.6 billion in programmatic ad revenue spread across the conservative news media.
I'm very familiar with this. I'm the former editor-in-chief of the Daily Caller, and we were constantly dealing with things like this. And and this is so Breitbart experienced what we also experienced, in addition to the threats to ad revenue that the left was manufacturing here, that these institutions were manufacturing. You also had algorithmic censorship. You had conservative websites being removed entirely from Google results. You could literally search verbatim headlines from conservative websites, and they would not show up on Google because Google was, as the language goes, deplatforming them.
Right. Well, in April 2017, Google launched something called Project Owl, which was a formal reordering of all of its search rank results to blacklist, to whitelist so-called authoritative news. They created this whitelist, blacklist, graylist system, basically a news cartel. And if you didn't belong to, you know, the clique of Pentagon back-channeled news outlets like the New York Times or the Washington Post, then you were either buried 10 pages deep where no one goes, or not searchable at all. And everything was reordered so that so-called authoritative sources, which just meant, you know, regime-approved, blob-approved news sources. I mean, they created a news cartel is what they did, and they were very open about it, I should add. I mean, these conferences that CIA cutouts like the National Endowment for Democracy would hold, they would talk openly about the need to bankrupt the alternative news ecosystem and to shoot the messengers, you know, to kill the message.
Finally, Mike, and thank you so much for your time. In the next 30 seconds or so, can you give me an assessment of what the state of play is going into the 2024 election? How pronounced are these threats now?
They've changed significantly in the past year and a half because we were able to achieve many victories in 2023, and there have been many changes to the chessboard, so to speak. The two main threats right now are the codification of the regulations around the EU Digital Services Act, which, before your eyes glaze over, that's NATO's international censorship bill. That's the Western military alliance's banning of anything that's so-called disinformation, and that is what could be a Twitter killer if it is not dealt with. And it's hard to think of a way to deal with it because the only force that could really stop it would be the U.S. State Department applying diplomatic pressure on the EU not to apply this law. But the Biden administration asked for this, and they're not going to do that. So it places, if Twitter, for example, is banned from Europe or forced to censor whatever NATO calls disinformation, then NATO said, whatever NATO says, and when I refer to NATO here, I'm referring to the whole stakeholder set around NATO as well. I mean, that's going to mean, all of the, you might call them deep state forces around our foreign policy blob here in the U.S. That it's all of those collective interests that are going to be represented. So any sensitive policy issue that they perceive their political opponents to be on the wrong side of will be deemed disinformation. And if you don't censor it, you're going to be kicked out of the European market, which is a larger market than the U.S. one, 500 million people there, or pay a 6% global annual revenue penalty. So it's very dicey how that will play out. That's the number one threat.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll have to. If you'd be so kind, I'd love to have you back. I want to talk as well at some point about the rise of AI and the role that's playing in all of this too. Mike, thank you very much. I genuinely appreciate your time. Mike Benz, Benz. Follow him on social media. Thank you, Mike.